Hey everyone, it is Saturday. I'm Zach, and this week we are talking about feminism. It would be very easy for me to talk a lot, and by a lot I mean a lot, about this topic. Feminism and social justice around women's and gender issues is very, very important to me, and I've spent a lot of my time studying this sort of stuff and doing activist work and all of that. This is another one of those topics where I could make a very long video, but I will do my best to refrain from that. So I guess, in conclusion, we'll probably end up with like a 10-minute video instead of a 20-minute video, but you know, you take what you can get with me, I suppose. I've identified as a feminist since I learned what a feminist was. And so I think it was probably middle school, like 7th, 8th grade, something like that. Um, I learned what a feminist was, you know, in the sort of general sense that you learn what things are when you're 12, and that it was wanting women and men to be equal, in the political realm, in the social realm, in the economic realm, etc., etc. Wanting men and women to be equal. And you know, when you're 12, for most people that's like, yeah, you know, I agree with that, you know, why not? And the other part of you is like, that's not the case because you're 12 and you kind of don't really see a bigger picture other than your immediate surroundings and your immediate circumstances. And when I was 12, I was a total like tomboy and I was super smart and no one really gave me shit for anything. So I didn't see why it was important, but I agreed with the general concept, I guess. Obviously, as I got older, I began to see the problems specifically that feminism was trying to address, and I also saw within it, you know, the problems within the feminist movement itself, and how various groups, various identities have gone about trying to rectify some of these problematic aspects of feminism and feminist theory. I should also say that I was like 2 classes away from a degree in women's studies when I graduated. I essentially was a double major. I just didn't want to take like another intro level class and feminist theories in context. I cannot deal with feminist theory classes, they make me want to cry. I like reading about theory, I don't like discussing it with professors, and I don't like writing papers about it. So I just avoided it. But for all intents and purposes, I was a double major in history and women's and gender studies, so I am by no means an expert on feminism and feminist theory, but I do know a little bit. So I'm gonna try my best to work in what I know to what I'm talking about. I think specifically since Chase and Chris did a really good job with talking about, you know, feminism in general and, you know, how it's impacted them and, you know, how they see feminism and kind of how it works today in a general sense. I think I'm going to talk more specifically about trans people and feminism and the history, the long and storied history between the two movements, because they are separate things a lot of the time. You know, even today, there's oftentimes a lot of disconnect between certain segments of the feminist and women's rights and etc. movements and trans rights and trans activist groups, even though, in my opinion, there should be a lot more overlap between the two. Not to say that there isn't, but there are still some very specific issues that come up that really need to be addressed and worked on within these communities, because there's some bullshit afoot, let me tell you. For a long time, large segments of the feminist movement had a big issue with trans people. There are a couple of very, very well-known texts, yeah, stupid lisp, by some very well-regarded feminists, in particular Mary Daly and Janice Raymond. Mary Daly There's a very, very well-known image of Mary Daly holding the double-headed axe, the labrys, out in front of her in a very threatening manner, which that picture always makes me giggle. I know it shouldn't, but it does, because she was kind of an ass. So pretty much Mary Daly wrote this book called fuck, what was it called? Right, so I had to Google it. It was called Gyne/Ecology. So it's like gynecology, but Gyne/Ecology. And pretty much in it, Mary Daly wrote that trans people were like omnipresent Frankensteins that were out to like derail and take over the feminist movement or something like that. Trans people, specifically trans women, I should say that most of the theories that I'm going to be talking about specifically apply to trans women. Trans men have not really been a big part of the feminist consciousness up until relatively recently, the last 10 or 15 years or so. Mostly because we were either seen as traitors or we weren't men anyways. We were confused women, we were, still butch lesbians, like whatever you want to call it. Radical feminists kind of just didn't accept it as an identity to begin with. Trans women, on the other hand, trans women were a whole other story. I wrote my senior thesis project thing on the rise of transmisogyny and radical feminism, and so yeah, so you had Mary Daly, and she's writing about, Frankenstein trans women, and then you had her protege, the infamous Janice Raymond, who wrote perhaps one of the most offensive, if it wasn't so ridiculously serious, it would be hilarious books, called The Transsexual Empire, The Making of the She-Male. I do not advise that anyone read this book. I read the entire thing and it made me want to cry, it made me want to throw up, it made me want to punch things, it made me want to laugh hysterically because I could not believe that anyone actually thought these things. So it's The Transsexual Empire, The Making of the She-Male, and in it, essentially what it boils down to is Janice Raymond thinks that trans women, aka male to constructed female, or transsexually constructed women. There's also the phrase that she uses called transsexually constructed lesbian feminists, which is perhaps, one of the most offensive things in the history of the world. So pretty much she thinks that trans women are, first of all, only transitioning so that they can seduce women and lesbians into sleeping with them, and B, that they're only out to wrangle the hold of radical feminism from the hands of real women, so that they can take it over and do what they will with it, thereby destroying all the efforts of radical feminists to create separatist women's spaces. It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? It doesn't in the book either. It's just a lot wordier and a lot more offensive than that, believe it or not. So from that whole sort of ideology that kind of really began with Mary Daly and Janice Raymond, kind of support for this sort of movement faded over time. But it still kind of manifests itself in very interesting ways, such as the Michigan Women's Music Festival, Women with a Y, wherein the policy of the festival specifically states that women born women, or women assigned female at birth, essentially, are the only people allowed in the festival. In the past, this has meant that they've accepted trans men into the festival, even though they're not women, but they don't allow trans women into the festival since they were assigned male at birth, because the penis itself is inherently offensive and inherently triggering to women. Just the mere fact that a person may have a penis is triggering, so that people with penises are not allowed. Yeah. And that, you know, somehow trans women are insulting women assigned female at birth, and that they shouldn't be allowed into this festival because it's supposed to be for women born women, and their male energy, like, I don't even know, man. Like, I can't even comprehend this. And this video is already like, it's 13, 14 minutes long. Like, trans issues and feminist issues, a lot of the times they're very similar. They're about reaching equality and about making sure that people that are historically left behind, in terms of access to social services, access to economic means, access to, you know, higher economic classes, access to jobs, access to housing, access to whatever. People that are historically shit on, making sure that they're shit on less, and making it so that, you know, they can live lives as equal to those of the ones that are historically in power, particularly cisgender white men. But there still seems to often be a lot of divide, especially in smaller, more radical niches of both movements, and there's still a lot of animosity. Personally, I've worked with feminist groups and, you know, people who advocate for women's issues and women's rights, and they're all awesome. And they've been totally receptive to my identity and my ideas, and been totally respectful and let me help with activism and whatever. So this is obviously not indicative of an entire movement, not even in the slightest. This is mostly like small groups of radical activists on either side. It's still an interesting phenomena, that's really, really important to discuss, because there is this history there, and, you know, transmisogyny keeps repeating itself over and over and over again in different segments of the population, and it's interesting and it's disgusting that there are certain segments of other activist groups and other sorts of, you know, social justice oriented people, that still perpetuate this gross inequality against women. You know, treating trans women as less than, as some sort of Frankenstein or some sort of medically constructed oddity, is absolutely abhorrent, and it makes me sick. So it's really important that we discuss these sorts of issues and the history behind them, and acknowledge that this history happened, and actively work towards rectifying it, and actively work towards creating spaces that are safe for women, all people that identify as female or as feminine, regardless of the sex they were assigned at birth. I am going to stop talking because I have talked a lot about essentially one thing, and like one very small specific topic. I wanted to talk about more than that, but I've already said too much. So I hope you enjoy the video. If there's anything that I got factually wrong or anything you disagree with, please let me know in the comments. Please send me a message, something. I really like discussing this topic. I'm always interested to learn more, hear new perspectives on these issues. So please engage with me in dialogue. I love engaging in dialogue. So I hope everyone is doing well and is having a good weekend, and until next week, bye.